Ved Pranam Mantra. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhi Tamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. In this series of talks on the Ved, today we will have a look at Kala Suktam. This comes in Atharva Veda. What we have been covering is mostly from the Rig Veda. Actually, Rig Veda is the main body of hymns, and the other three have borrowed heavily from the Rig Veda. That's why you will see that most of the sorry, most of the hymns are from the Rig Veda, and important too. So this one, Kala, on time, this is taken from Atharva Veda, and there are Atharva Veda, book number 19. Actually, in Atharva Veda, what happens, if you look at Atharva Veda, the arrangements are different depending on which publication you have taken. Because see, these things were not really organized the way we understand. So different publishers publish them slightly differently. Same with Rig Veda too. So this comes in book number 19 and hymn number 53. There are 10 verses, 10 mantras. We have taken only 4 because that makes the idea absolutely clear. And the sage for it is Bhrigu. Bhrigu was a very famous sage of the Vedic period. So before we have a look at these 4 mantras, and I'm sure we won't take much time today, first we will have to understand what exactly is kala, time. See, somehow time and the passage of time, it has been extremely fascinating for the human race. Maybe for the animals too, we have no idea about them. But as far as the humanity is concerned, we know how fascinating it has been. We even otherwise say, even today, we're pretty curious. We're pretty curious, and we often think, what is time? Is it elusive? Is it real? And how to record it, etc., etc., etc. See, personally, my encounter with time as an entity was when I was a young boy studying in my village school. Surprisingly, my village school was a very good school and pretty famous in those days. So I remember one of my seniors, he was just 1 year senior to me. I was in class 4, 5, something like that. And we were 4 or 5 of us. Someone commented on time, something. And that senior, he was considered to be pretty good in studies. And he said a beautiful statement. He said that, look, time is an artificial division that we have created. So this happens way back in maybe 1968 or 69. I don't remember exact year. Probably in 69. It struck me deep that even in those days we knew how to regulate our life according to the watch. And suddenly here comes a statement that it's an artificial thing created by human beings. And second encounter with time was, it's surprising that how fascinated I must have been with time that I didn't forget these things. During that period, maybe a year before this, one of my teachers narrated how the clock was invented. Most of you must be knowing it. Galileo, the great scientist Galileo, once he was sitting in the church and the lamp was lit. Probably it was evening. And those of you might have seen a cathedral, the ceilings are pretty high. So the lamps that are hanging from there are at a height. So there was a particular system to light those lamps. And pretty difficult thing. You can imagine something at such height and filling that lamp with oil. That had to be done at daytime and lighting it with a long stick. And the lamp started swinging, obviously. And Galileo suddenly had one of those moments of inspiration. This is what happens with great scientists. What we normally overlook, they don't. And he started measuring the duration of the periodicity. And he was surprised to see that as the lamp was slowing down, the time taken by it remained the same. And that he calculated with the help of his pulse. So he measured his pulse and he kept account. I mean, must have been a great scientist. Nowadays, we do the reverse. Now we take a watch and count the pulse. And he did exactly the reverse. Counted the pulse to measure time. It's a very fascinating thing. These two incidents, they never left me. Never. Let's see how pulse was used to measure time and now how we use time to measure the pulse and how this invention of clock was done. Now, when we say invention of clock, that's again slightly misnomer because we in India, we always had this very clear idea about division of time, etc., which we will mention. And even in the earlier times, like during the time of Julius Caesar and all, even before that, they had the custom of having this this sand glass, and they used to make it in such a way that they counted an hour, and so they had that division of 24 hours, etc. However, what Galileo did was he gave a very clear formula of periodicity, and that's how pendulum clocks and from their wristwatches and all these quartz, all these things came up. Thus, you can see how time is extremely fascinating and it's so important for us to measure it correctly. You'll be surprised. Most of you, of course, must be knowing this that since the most ancient times, we Indians have been extremely particular about the timings. Like, if a ritual had to be performed, say a marriage or a sacred thread, so they had a very clear system of how to measure it. So it was not a crude measurement based just on sunrise, sunset, etc. However, what Galileo did was remarkable, and that's how science has moved forward so much. Now, if you look at time very closely, you realize that time has three distinct personalities or aspects. The first one is physical. Time, kind of just like us, it has three aspects, three personalities. First is physical. What we are discussing, like what we have been discussing about Galileo and all, these are all the physical aspects. Now, Aristotle was the first person who very clearly said that is the calculable measure. Calculable measure. That means these people had a very distinct idea about how to measure time of motion. So time is somehow related to motion with respect to before and afterness. Afterness. Something happens just before that and it's completed just after that. And that's how we say past, present, and future. So here is this pen. Pen has a present about it. And whatever happened before this is past for the pen. And once it gets destroyed, it will all be future. And then again, when you measure it from space time, that is four dimensions, well, then every moment is towards the left is past and towards the right is future. Well, that's the customary way of, that's the most popular custom of presenting time. Towards your left or towards your back is past, towards your front, and towards your right is future. Now, when Newton came on the scene, one of the finest scientists we have ever known, he gave us an idea of absolute time. Now, these are extremely important things. You might think why we are discussing all this. It's important. There was a sense of absoluteness, and those of you who have listened to our Nasadiya Sukta talk would recollect that time and space, according to Newton, are absolute. Newton was a believer of Christian God. So there had to be a creator God. And if there was a creator God, well, he was a great watchmaker who created this universe and set it in motion. And that's how time and space, these are fixed and absolute. Things happen within it. Einstein changed all this and he said, no, there's nothing called absolute space, there's nothing called absolute time. It's all this, the idea being there's no master clock. And it's about motion and observer. However, there was another great scientist known as Arthur Eddington. Those of you who know a bit of physics know about Arthur Eddington. He was a person who did lots of practical experiments, and he was a person who came up with expressions like Big Bang, and he studied solar eclipse and proved Einstein's theory of relativity to be correct. So he gave the idea of arrow of time. Now see, while Aristotle was pretty vague about time, Newton gave a very clear idea about absoluteness. And Einstein said there is nothing absolute. And Eddington very clearly said there is an arrow of time which moves in one direction. Now, these things are very important thing because the moment you say that it moves in one direction, that means it's linear, moving in a straight line. So past, present, future, etc., they become clearly defined. And you'll be surprised to conclude from this that the moment you talk about arrow of time, the Christian concept of creation. God created the universe and the universe has been moving forward. When you talk about evolution, Darwin's evolution, without even meaning it, you are accepting this Christian concept of creation. Actually, most of the science that we know today, unknowingly, unwittingly, they all fall in line with the Christian concept of creation. That might be one reason why science is not able to develop as much as it should. The second aspect of time is psychological. that that which happens within us. Those of you who have listened to our Mandukya Karika talks would remember it, that there's a very clear distinction made between the time that's measured outside and the time that is felt inside the mind. It's very surprising, It's in fact very sad that we Indians, by that I mean we Hindus, we have no idea about our own scriptures, and we don't know the great contribution of our own sages and saints and philosophers. And if only we had done it, the world would have been a much better place. Mandukya Karika makes a very clear distinction between the physical time and the psychological time. And in the West, there was this French philosopher, Henri Bergson. It's a very interesting philosopher. He was practically the first person who talked about the psychological aspect of time, and he called it la durée or whatever French, that means duration. So you have the time that takes place and time that is experienced within you. Actually, it's very, very, very important. In fact, once independently, long ago, maybe 8, 10 years ago, I first realized the importance of the psychological aspect of time and the physical aspect of time. And then wanted to write that how both these aspects are so important for us, because our life runs on the psychological aspect of time. That means when you are waiting for somebody, time seems to stretch. And when you are running for something, time seems to shrink. Suppose you have to meet someone and you are running, you will feel as if time has shortened. And somebody who is waiting for you, he will be continuously looking at the watch and, oh, time is not passing, like that. It's very interesting because I find this concept very fascinating. Because when Einstein talks about time shrinking in the direction of the motion of the object, etc., etc. So I don't know. I mean, some scientists may work it out. Then there was Stephen Hawking, another great person who wrote the famous book A Brief History of Time. And you can imagine how mystifying this subject time must be. That A Brief History of Time is considered to be the greatest bestseller which was read by a minimum number of people. So A Brief History of Time sold millions and millions of copies. And very few people ever completed the first 2, 3 chapters. Now, he talked about something very interesting, what I was talking, that psychological time is intertwined with the thermodynamic time. Exactly, this is what I was trying to work out. I did not know in those days that Stephen Hawking had already worked it out. That, however, what he implied was we never go backward in time. That means our psychological measure of time is never backward. It's always, that means arrow of time is maintained. Now, the third aspect is the spiritual aspect. So time has 3 aspects. First, physical. Second, psychological. Third, spiritual. Now, spiritual aspect is not focused by the Western philosophers, definitely not by the scientists. It's only in India that we emphasize a lot on the third aspect too. Surprisingly, the second aspect, the psychological aspect, has not been emphasized much other than a casual mention here and there. implying that, for example, they talk about dream state where the flow of time changes completely. And when you wake up, you relate the idea of your time with the physical time and then realign things. It's a very fascinating subject. Actually, I find it very fascinating. I wanted to write a paper for our journal. But anyway, so Kal is known as Parameshwar. In fact, this hymn that we are studying is dedicated to Kala Parameshwar, God, God of the universe, Supreme God. Now, in India, physical aspect and the spiritual aspect, they play a very important role. Now, in uh, in its physical aspect, the division of time began from the standard of time. Sorry, standard unit of time began from a wink, kala, kastha, etc. You might have read it in Devi Mahatmya, Durga Saptashati or Chandi. Now, when Al Biruni came to India to study Indian system, I mean, he wrote, I remember very clearly, he wrote, what would anyone do with such division of time? And today we know how nano and pico and what all seconds. And from there, it stretches to Brahma's life, which is four followed by something like 14 zeros, roughly, approximately. So there is time, time, and time. Most importantly, starting from Aristotle through Newton, Einstein, and Stephen Hawking, we don't believe in arrow of time, which is very, very, very important for us. Now, why it happened, very difficult for me to say, because it might be because of the periodicity that we see, that the sun rising every day, the moon rising every day, etc. However, we Indians firmly believe in the cyclic nature of time. Compared to this Western concept of arrow of time, which always moves forward, we have the cyclic nature of time. Similarly, as far as evolution is concerned, we also believe in involution. That means you may evolve to be God, and if you do bad acts, you might as well fall down and become an animal and bird, etc., to lower species. That means if expansion is possible, contraction too is possible. Now, that is something which will not be permitted in the Christian concept of creation. Because in Christian concept, by Christian I mean Abrahamic, that takes Judaism and Islam into it. Because when God creates, God is not just anybody. God is a super conscious being. Now, when He creates, and because creation is one time affair, that's what the Old Testament says. There must be something in His mind. So there must be some purpose behind it. And because there is some purpose behind it, the whole thing has to move forward. And that's why we have a purpose in life. We have to have a goal in life. And God has decided what to do and what not to do. So all these confusing things that you hear about life and science, etc., is the mega contribution of the Bible. Predestination and God's will, and God has decided this for me, and God is in charge, and God will do all these utter nonsense things. Utter nonsense. That means you are an entity, God is another entity, God has decided this for you. No, we don't believe in all this thing. And forget that spiritual aspect of life. We are talking purely the physical aspect of life. A time, space, universe, creation, etc. All these things for we Hindus are cyclic. Nothing is linear. The purpose of life is me, because I alone exist. Self-realization is the only goal of life. Everything else is just mere sight, passing sights. There is no purpose in life. It's not the fight between good and bad. It's not about becoming good. I mean, you might come across such quotations, say, even in Swami Vivekananda, but that is just to put a point across. Now, with this physical aspect of time and the spiritual aspect of time, it is but natural that we will have many terms for time, unlike, say, in the Western world. So we have expressions like Kala, and then we have Mahakal. And just to distinguish between Kal in its physical aspect and the spiritual aspect, we have Mahakal as well as Kali, Mother Kali, Mother Kali, who is the other half of Mahakal, and who is Eva Kal. What about the philosophical aspect? Philosophical aspect either will belong to spirituality or to psychological aspect or to the physical aspect. Now, for us, time is the dividing line between the absolute and the relative. Those of you who are keen to know about the Indian spiritual traditions, you have to get familiar with these two expressions, absolute and the relative. We do not know how the one undivided consciousness, and because it is one undivided consciousness, we can't even say that it's one. The absolute consciousness, how it appears as manifold, how it appears as divided. We have absolutely no idea. What we know, what we know is that there is some kind of a imaginary dividing line between the absolute and the relative. And this dividing line is time space causation. There is time, there is space, and causations. What Aristotle talked about before and after of an event. Because whenever you talk about causation, causation itself means motion. And every motion will mean rest before it and rest after that. And that's the measure. That's causation. So time, space, and causation. And time, space, and causation is directly related to the mind. And that's why for us, those of you who have been listening to our talks very seriously on the Vedas and maybe have listened to the Upanishads, etc., we have repeatedly stressed the point that creation means time, space, causation, and mind. Now, you cannot differentiate time, say, with mind or space. Now, this is something very fascinating and very difficult to prove or disprove. As I told you that not once actually, it's still there. I had very strong desire to write a work on empires of the mind. That how it's mind that creates a sense of time and of space and of causation and of existence. And yet everything is all absolute. How the mind creates the idea of physical universe, subtle universe, causal universe, that is Sthul Jagat, Sukshma Jagat, Karan Jagat, and although it is all Mahakaran all the time, how it creates a waking state, dream state, deep sleep, and yet it is always Turiya. These things have been discussed in the Upanishads, but like Mao Zedong had very famously said, every generation must have its own revolution. I also believe every generation must have its own scriptures and its own interpretation of the scriptures. So, but anyway, now I'm on the wrong side of age. It's difficult. Maybe some of our young listeners may someday come up with a really wonderful explanation on these topics. So Devata is Kala, who is Parmeshwar, who is the creator, sustainer, and destroyer of the universe, which is Parameshwar, Maheshwar. So Devata is Kala. And Rishi, as I said, Bhrigu. Kalo Ashwo Vahati Sapta Rashmihi Sahasraksho Ajaro Bhuri Reta Tamarohanti Kabayo Vipaschitastasya Chakra Bhuvanani Vishwa. So Kal is very clearly seen here as God in this. The English translation is very simple. Kala. Kala drives a horse with Sapta Rashmi. How do you translate Rashmi? It would be seven rays. It would be seven rains because a horse is running. There's a rider on the horse, and Kal is driving that horse. The expression being Kalu Ashwo Vahati Sapta Rashmihi. If you take it literally, it would be seven rains. But the expression Rashmi means rays. Now, what is very fascinating about Sapta Rashmi, why they have always used the expression Sapta Rashmi. It can also mean seven colors. Much later, it was Newton who found that sunlight is made of seven colors, seven different colors. This is again is very fascinating thing. That's why people say that the Vedas are so fascinating. When I was writing this book, Veda Vihangam, I myself was fascinated, and I deliberately kept the work small so that people have some idea about the Vedas. And if someone in future really get interested, they can come up with many things. The unfortunate thing is that many scholars are working on different kind of interpretations on these four Vedas. Sometimes they are far-fetched, and no wonder people laugh at us. The kind of interpretations and the kind of conclusions that they're coming up with, these scholars, it stinks of orthodoxy. Worse, it stinks of ignorance. Because whatever the Vedas say, they must be in consonance with what we know about the universe. It's not about that we have to fall in line with science, but the general understanding of spirituality, as given by, say, Shankaracharya, the great Shankaracharya, or even Swami Vivekananda, is that when it comes to spiritual matters, it's perfectly all right for them to speak anything. However, when they are talking about the holy matters, what I'm perceiving, this perception may be what we get through our five senses, not the defective ones, but the right ones, and what science tells us. Because what is science? Science is the knowledge that we gain through our extended senses. So, science, science and religion, these two must not be at loggerheads. No, they cannot be. They should be. And we Hindus, we never had issues with it because we knew that spirituality is something and what we see in the universe is something different. And as our senses become more powerful through telescope, through microscope, and through other instruments, the knowledge of the universe will naturally be enhanced. And as there is enhancement in knowledge, the understanding of the universe will change, and we have no issues with that. But what I'm talking about is Saptarashmi. It's very interesting. And Sahasraksho, thousand-eyed. Because time is present everywhere. And you might remember Purus Suktam where it says, Sahasraksha Sahasrapat. Because it's present everywhere. Sahasra is the expression used Time is present everywhere, so it knows everyone, it knows everything. This, this is this idea about time being present everywhere and time taking care of everything. In English, we don't have such beautiful expression, but in the Indian tradition, the expressions are so beautiful and so poetic. And the idea of time regulating our life, etc., it has entered our very being. In the stories of the Puranas, in the stories of Mahabharata, time as being the greatest healer and time as being the greatest regulator. It's the use of word time is not correct. Kala. Because when you say Kala, you get a divine entity. Time seems so dry, so mechanical. So it's Kala. It's Kala. It's Kala that takes us through myriads of experiences, the good, the bad, the indifferent. It's Kala that is taking us towards realization. It's Kala that is actually Prakriti. It's Prakriti appearing before us as Kala. Sahasraksho Ajaro Bhuri Reta. It's unaging. Time does not age. Kala as God does not age. So there is no present, past, future for Kala possessing fertility. So it's time that gives birth to everything. Him, the wise is his mount. His wheels are all beings. So Kali is initially compared to a powerful horse. Seven reins. They say that it's because of 6 seasons, and there is one Adhimas, that extra month. That's the interpretation by the great commentators. Very difficult to say what exactly it means. That is 2 extra months that come in lunar calendar. Everything ages in the universe. The aging process is because of Kala, but Kala himself never ages. And it has boundless fertility. That's how you find beings getting born and moving from one sphere to another sphere. We die, we go to this sphere, that sphere, etc. And those who mount this horse, the horse on which the on which Kal is riding, it can take you anywhere because time is present everywhere. If you can master time, like this, we have this famous expression in both in Bengali and Hindi that it's not good time for us. Just wait. Whenever you are facing bad times, just lie low. However, the sages mount this horse to go beyond time. It's a very fascinating thing. If you try to master time, you become master of the universe. And when you ride its horse to go beyond, you can go beyond. So it's time, it's Kala who makes you master of the universe. It's Kala who takes you beyond this existence. Such a beautiful thing. Sapta chakrana vahati kala esa saptasya nabhi amritam nu akshaha sa ima vishwa bhuvnani agyat ka laha sa iyate prathamo nu deva. Its 7 wheels carry Kala, and 7 are his naves. Immortality is its axle. Kala brings hitherward all worlds. As the first God is he entreated. And this second mantra, it makes you up, it gives you a very clear idea about how we perceive Kal, time. Kal is the first God, first God in the universe, obviously. Because a dividing line, as we mentioned, that between the absolute and the relative is the dividing line. Being the dividing line, it has to be the God of the universe. Now, naturally, you will say that, well, when we think of God, we think of the spiritual entity, etc. Yes, perfectly all right. But as you remember that Hindu religion is not based on the words of one single person who at times might have imagined things and might have had some experiences. It's the four Vedas. These are the truths that these sages discovered the depths of their meditation. And it's a well documented thing. There's nothing physical about it. There's no imagination in it. Everything, whatever is spiritual. So, depending on the object of their meditation, it is natural that some sage will talk about this God and some sage will talk about this God. So, there might be some sage who was focusing a lot on time, and that's how he came up with this, which is a fact indeed. So, it says Kala moves on a chariot. Earlier it was horse, now it's chariot. It's metaphorically, of course. It has seven wheels, that is the seasons, and seven naves, the conjunction point of the seasons. And yet, its axle is immortal. So, God, the absolute, never changes. The moment there is creation, there is time. When there is time, there is season, there is year, there is month, week, etc., etc. So, this is what is being described here, that that Kala, this is how it moves. This is how time moves. The season changes, day changes into night. And you know that Kala is moving. Purna kumbhodhi kala ahitastam vai pashyamo bodhanusantah sa ima vishwabhunani pratyangkalam tamahu parame vyoman. The universe is, this universe is a full vessel settled on Kala. It's a very fascinating thing that we see becoming manifold. That which is the universe they call Kala, which extends up to the heaven. Those of you who have read the book Veda Vihangam, in the opening chapter itself, we have described how we the common minds, are aware of the physical universe only. But those who meditate, they are aware of the subtle universe too. And those who are real sages, they are aware of the Karan universe, the causal universe. And the rare few, they know Mahakaran, they are one with Mahakaran. The best teachers are those who move between Mahakaran and Karan. Mahakaran is the absolute, because anyone who has experienced Mahakaran doesn't want to come back to the physical universe. And Karan is the highest manifestation of the absolute in the relative. That means God. Most religions talk about Karan Jagat, and the God that they discuss, God they talk about is Ishvara, the manifestation, the projection of the absolute on the Karan Jagat. However, the best books are religious books, those who talk about both Karan and Mahakaran. And the ultimate sacred book has to talk about all the four: physical, causal, Sukshma Jagat, that is, gods and goddesses, and one God, and finally the absolute. So it says, this Atharva Veda, this is talking about universe is a full vessel settled on Kala. The universe is just settled on time. That means time is much more permanent than the universe. Universes will be created and will be destroyed. Time will continue to be there. Is time, it's Kala, which keeps on manifesting itself, which appears as universe. Those of you who are familiar with Bengali language and Bengali tradition of spirituality, you know that when we talk about Mother Kali, we say that in her womb there are millions and billions of universes. Not universe, Brahmanda, much more than universe. Mother Kali, the highest manifestation of the divinity in this universe, relative universe. And you can also see Kali as Brahman, Kali as absolute. In her womb, that means when we are talking about the physical aspect, there are millions, koti Brahmanda, millions and billions of Brahmanda, the mega universe. So these universes rise and merge in the ocean of Mother Kali, just like bubbles rise and merge in water. The universe in which we are right now, whatever our understanding, whatever our appreciation, is ultimately just like a full vessel, like a vessel in the ocean. The ocean is Kala. Universe and time are thus connected. We cannot see one without the other. So you cannot have universe without time, and you cannot have time without universe. And so Newton was practically correct when he talked about absoluteness of time and space. However, as you go higher and as you see different kind of physics, things change. But these are very fascinating things, and I'll request you to listen to the introduction that we had just now once again to understand what exactly Atharva Veda is talking about. So another interpretation is that God with form, manifesting as the universe, sits on the absolute, indivisible consciousness like a full vessel. Just now we talked about Mahakaran and Karana. Mahakaran is undifferentiated, the absolute consciousness. The relative one, which is personal God, God with form, he kind of sits on it. Like you can imagine, there's a huge ocean. Some part of it is solidified because of cold, ice, sitting on the ocean. And God alone knows the past, present, and future. Like as in Gita, we know Veda Vihangam samtitani. Sa eva sang abhuvanani abharat. Sa eva sang abhuvanani paryait. Pita san abhavat putra esham tasmadve nanyat paramasti teja. So now the hymn comes to the real thing. He only made the world of life. He only gathered the worlds of living things together. Whatever is there around us, the time that has brought us. Those of you might have studied Adhyatma, Ramayana and all. There they discuss it's time. Like as a river flows, things come together, objects that are floating in the river. They come together and separate after a time. So in this life, like those of you who are listening to these talks, we have come together. I'm explaining the sacred scriptures before you, and you are listening. We are connected. Why? It's because of time. After some time, you may say, "Oh, what a boring series of talks." You will get separated. It's because of time. That's why we always stress a lot on the importance of time in life. So he only made the worlds of life. He only gathered the worlds of living things together. He, the Father, because Kal is the father of everything, becomes become son of them. He's the father, and he is born as creatures. That means he becomes the son. The father becomes the son. It's fascinating. And no other higher power than he exists. If you talk about the absolute, then of course prayers do not matter. However, I mean, if a commentator wants, he can always explain it from the standpoint of the absolute too. But it is from the standpoint of the universe. Kal has created everything. And whatever is being created, that is also Kal. So it's the Father. His Father is born as the Son. Like those of you who are familiar with the Bible would know how Jesus talks about the Father and Son are one. Seen from the aspect of Kal, his Father who becomes the Son. I mean, it's a very interesting aspect. Then there are other verses. This is verses number 5 to 10, which we have not put because it's repetitive. The idea is the same, in which it says how Kala created space, earth, etc., and the vital energies in the body. The idea remains the same. So, how to understand all this? Through meditation. How to have a grasp over time? Through meditation. Like Sri Ramakrishna had wonderfully said, Kesab Chandra got some fame, whatever fame Kesab Chandra got, it was because of meditation. And going beyond time, possible through meditation. Well, that's the idea. So that's Kal Sukta that we had. And the next talk will be on Maya Bhed. How to transcend Maya. These two are related because time itself is Maya. And we will have a detailed discussion of Maya Bhed in the next talk. Thank you so much. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.